This week we're going to talk about the setting of short stories. And of course, remember, whenever I'm talking about one of these elements within the short story, they also hold true for novels and also for drama. We're going to read a couple of plays. And in reality, it applies to poetry as well. Now, when we say setting, there are several aspects to which we do refer. One is the time period in which a story takes place. 1940s, present, past, or even the future. That is, an element of the setting, and it's important. And I have been talking about historical context in conjunction with characterization and how important it is to the plot of the story. And two of those, it's been important in all of the stories, but particularly in A Thing in the Forest, World War II, or The Thing in the Forest, World War II, and also A Rose for Emily, whereas, Emily is the product of her era and her time period. So that's important. The setting also refers to other things. Setting is also, of course, the place where the story occurs. And sometimes this is very important, and sometimes it's negligible. Cheever's story was important, where it took place, in that suburban neighborhood. That story wouldn't have taken place in the deep south out in the hills. It just wouldn't have done that. So where the story takes place and the time period that it takes place are both two very important things to take into consideration. Whether or not they matter to the story itself, you still need to ask yourself when and where. Now, one thing the setting does for a story is it sets the mood. Sometimes it's difficult to set the mood in the story, and stories have different moods, and you know that because when you read something that's light and cheery, that's a mood. And when you read something that's dark and dreary, that is the mood as well. And one of the best ways to set that mood is by the setting. When you read something and it starts out and it is the dark of night and there's thunder crashing and lightning forking through the sky, what are you going to expect in that story? You're going to expect something gothic. You're going to expect something scary to happen. And on the other hand, if it is a bright and sunny day outside, then you're going to expect something else. But sometimes authors will use that setting in the opposite way from what you expect. And we're going to see that in Shirley Jackson's story, The Lottery. But we also see it in other type of literary venues. If you have seen the movie, now I have not read the books of Lemony Snicket, but I have seen the movie, A Series of Unfortunate Events. And if you've seen that movie, you know it starts out and there's some little elves hopping around and bonnies, and the voiceover comes over and the narrator says, if you've come into this movie theater looking for a happy story, you're in the wrong place. But those little elves hopping around in the lightness leads us to believe something. And when I went to the movie theater to see that and I saw the elves, I thought, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be dark and satirical. And of course, it was. So those are some things to take into consideration as well. When you're reading this week's selections of stories, one is The Littoral Zone, and it is taking place in very realistic settings. Now, the time might not be so important of this, the place is. And that is because this littoral zone, this tide zone, encompasses so much. At low tide, it's exposed. At high tide, it's covered up. What does that say about the characters in the story and their actions? Because it is important. And then the Marquez story, which happens to be one of my favorites, and yeah, you have to suffer through the ones that I like. The setting is likewise very important. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the Marquez story because that is going to be your journal entry, and I will post a video later in the week after you've done your original postings. And I want to discuss some of the aspects of that story. You're going to discuss them first in your journal, and then I'm going to give you my take on it as usual, and then you're going to repost. So always keep in mind the aspects of the setting, the historical context, when, where, and how it sets the mood.